Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Patricic, the Program Manager for Research and Publications at the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture, and I'm delighted that you've joined us this evening for our lecture, What is Culture? This lecture tonight is made possible by the support of the John Schuster Memorial Fund, and we are thrilled to have so many friends, colleagues, and students here tonight as we celebrate two developments in the life of the Nicola Center. Tonight's event is both a celebratory welcome to our new director, Professor Jennifer Newsome Martin, and a kickoff event for what will be our 25th year here at Notre Dame. We have lots to share in the coming weeks and months, both looking back at 25 years of research, service, and engagement, and looking forward to another 25 years at Our Lady's University. We'll have many events, initiatives, and announcements to mark this next phase in the life of the Nicola Center, so tonight is just the beginning. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture was established in 1999 under the leadership of David Solomon, our first director, who joins us this evening. And the Nicola Center was founded with the mission to share the richness of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition through teaching, research, and engagement at the highest level and across a range of disciplines. We do this in four main ways: academic research and programming, of which the Fall Conference has become the centerpiece as the largest annual academic conference on campus, along with 3 robust publication series with the University of Notre Dame Press. Also through student formation and our Soren Fellows program for undergraduate and graduate students at the university, building a culture of life and supporting a culture of life both here on campus and in the wider public square, and finally, assisting the university in its goal of hiring excellent scholars for mission. Since the center's founding, we have had many milestones, far too many to name tonight, but I will highlight one that speaks to this evening's topic. As of this afternoon, we are approaching 650 Soren Fellows. Can I ask Soren Fellows, if you're here, raise your hands? I point this out not, yes. I point this out not because it's a numbers game, but because it's unavoidably evident to me that our students here at Notre Dame and all of us hunger for the richness of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition. Our mission at Notre Dame and our commitment to the good from which all good flows is what sets us apart and makes us unique. Tonight, we return to one of the fundamental questions that drives our mission and work at Notre Dame and the Nicola Center. What is Catholic culture? Reflecting on the relationship between ethics and culture is an increasingly consequential proposal amid the vexing questions of our day, both within the context of the liberal arts education and in the more broad public square. Tonight, Professor Martin will address this relationship between ethics and culture, and even more precisely, an ethics of culture. So now to introduce this evening's speaker. It is a true honor and privilege to be joined this evening by Professor Jennifer Newsome Martin, the John J. Kavanaugh Associate Professor of the Program of Liberal Studies, Associate Professor in the Department of Theology, and now the 3rd Director of the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Professor Martin is a systematic theologian with areas of interest in 19th and 20th century Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox thought, Trinitarian theology, theological aesthetics, religion and literature, ressourcement theology, and the nature of religious tradition. Her first book, Urs von Balthasar and the Critical Appropriation of Russian Religious Thought from the University of Notre Dame Press, was one of 10 winners internationally of the 2017 Manfred Lautenschlager Award for Theological Promise. Over 20 articles and book chapters have appeared in such volumes as Modern Theology, Communio International Catholic Review, the Newman Studies Journal, International Journal of Systematic Theology, and a number of edited volumes and collections of essays. She serves on the editorial boards of Religion and Literature, Theological Studies, and the University of Notre Dame Press, and is the series editor for 2 monograph series, University of Notre Dame Press's Catholic Ideas for a Secular World, and the UK-based Explorations at the Crossroads of Theology and Aesthetics at TNT Clark Bloomsbury. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jennifer Newsome Martin.
Good evening, friends. I'm so happy you're here. I am genuinely grateful to each of you for coming to hear this inaugural lecture as the new director of the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture. As Justin pointed out, the DCEC is celebrating its 25th anniversary at Notre Dame this academic year, which calls, I think, for something of a retrospective mode, a contemplative reflection upon the center's very fundaments: ethics, culture, and perhaps more importantly, the ampersand or coordinating conjunction between them. Next year is also the 60th anniversary of Gaudium et Spes, Vatican II's pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, a magisterial document which is, I think, the first to include a lengthy discussion of the phenomenon of culture as such. And finally, the historic Great Books program, liberal arts department in which I teach, which is called the Program of Liberal Studies, is about to enter its 75th year in the university. All of this has prompted a collective conversation among our faculty about the place and enduring value of liberal arts education, especially within a Catholic research institution. Such is the rich context in which arose the impulse to ask what is, I know, a whale of a question. What is Catholic culture? Seems like I should know, given my new job. Any given culture, of course, includes the diverse material, intellectual, artistic, social, political, spiritual, religious, linguistic, practical, technological, legal, symbolic, and otherwise real forces and values, whether articulated or hidden, that dynamically shape the communal life of human beings. Now, somewhere along the way, you may have come across Jorge Borges' marvelous short story called The Library of Babel, which offers a strange and wonderful narrative about an infinite library in absolute space, a repository of interminably locking hexagons that contain all that is able to be expressed in every language. And when Borges says all, he really means all. Quote, "The detailed history of the future, the autobiographies of the archangels, the faithful catalog of the library, thousands and thousands of false catalogs, the proof of the falsity of those false catalogs, a proof of the falsity of the true catalog, the Gnostic gospel of Basilides, the commentary upon that gospel, the commentary on the commentary of that gospel, the true story of your death, the translation of every book into every language, the interpolations of every book into all books, the treatise Bede could have written, but did not, on the mythology of the Saxon people, and so on and so forth. Within this infinite library, the whole universe, is every conceivable combination of letters, spaces, and punctuation marks. Every single book, real and imagined, actual and possible, those written and those which could conceivably ever have been written. As with Borges' mythical library, the potential answers to the question, what is Catholic culture, multiply in a riot of possibility nearly beyond all telling. Filed in the imagined card catalog under Catholic culture, cross-referenced neatly under lectures I might have written but did not, are gathered a nearly infinite cloud of witnesses. Fra Angelico's breathtaking frescoes in the convent of San Marco in Florence, raucous Mardi Gras celebrations in New Orleans, Filipino believers gathering early on a December morning for the Simbang Gabi Novena, mass-produced plastic rosaries, saint candles at the grocery store, young women wearing chapel veils, young women not wearing chapel veils, the beautifully theologically rich poetry of Dante's Divine Comedy, every one of Andy Warhol's 60 Last Suppers, the glorious spectacle of Eucharistic processions, liturgical objects from vestments to reliquaries, chalices to patens, Flannery O'Connor's searingly imperfect, good country people, hagiographies, watercolor images of saints on holy cards, Gregorian chant, polyphony, enormous networks of Catholic clinics and hospitals, diocesan schools, Gothic cathedrals like Chartres, simple dorm chapels across our own campus, the Canterbury Tales, cradle Catholics, converts, charisms, and spiritualities as diverse as the Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits, and Carmelites. What I'm belaboring here, and I know I am belaboring it, is that there are as many and as polyphonous Catholic cultures, or at least subcultures, as there are Catholic practitioners. People who live and pray in Mexico, Italy, France, Peru, Brazil, the Philippines, Poland, Nigeria, the United States, and many more times and places beside. Here comes everybody. This litany of examples should suggest to us that Catholic culture is certainly not restricted to that which is elite, works of particular genius within the realms of high knowledge or art, or alternatively, reductively relegated only to the sphere of politics. Moreover, it should also suggest, in concert with the claims of Gaudium et Spes, that the Catholic Church is, quote, by virtue of her universal mission and nature, bound to no particular form of human culture, nor to any political, economic, or social system. That is to say, Catholic culture is a phenomenon which, at the very least, is non-monolithic, non-homogeneous, and non-partisan. So far, so good. But now, we turn down a long and lovely corridor and discover with a start that the shelves in the Catholic Culture Library have somehow expanded to include books from non-Catholics, even non-Christians. There's the epics of Homer, all the dialogues of Plato, the poetry of Virgil, Cicero's treatises on rhetoric, novels from the likes of C.S. Lewis, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy, Herman Melville. The shelves then begin to recede from our sight into the near infinite distance. And we get the sense that probably even more books are being added down the line. We might well remember here Flannery O'Connor's quip in Mystery and Manners that the Catholic novelist doesn't have to be a saint. He doesn't even have to be a Catholic. He does, unfortunately, have to be a novelist. Of course, theologians have suggested similar ideas in many different idioms. In the early church, St. Justin Martyr spoke of the logos spermatikos, or seeds of the word, which are sown throughout pagan culture. St. John Henry Newman articulates with force that the Catholic Church's principle is one and the same throughout, not to prohibit truth of any kind. Romano Guardini wrote provocatively in The Church and the Catholic that, quote, genuine Catholicity, which is seriously convinced of the supernatural and dogmatic character of Catholicism, is the most open-minded and the most comprehensive attitude, or rather, the only open-minded, comprehensive attitude in existence. Swiss theologian Urs von Balthasar made a similar intervention in his own little book on Catholicity, In the Fullness of Faith, on the centrality of the distinctively Catholic, when he claimed that being Catholic means embracing everything, leaving nothing out. And in his theological fragments, Henri de Lubac praises the French Catholic poet Paul Claudel's exultant yes to everything. Yes to being, yes to creation as to its creator, yes to the church who brings the Savior's presence to us. O complete credo of things visible and invisible, I accept you with a Catholic heart. Yes to God, the God ever greater, that is, to the inexhaustible being, always beyond all that we can think and say about him. For many of these theologians, the structural generosity of Catholicity to the other, which, let me be the first to admit, has certainly not always been borne out in either Christian history or contemporary practice, rests fundamentally upon theological claims about the nature of God. The church, as Balthasar has argued, can be Catholic only because God is Catholic first. That is to say, God's divine nature is characterized not only by the Catholicity of divine plenitude or fullness, but also by a capaciousness that is always slipping its bounds. Divine essence is a paradoxically ecstatic existence, which is always, so to speak, beyond itself. It joyfully exists in the other. God the Father is in the Son. He who has seen me, Jesus said, has seen the Father. God, the infinite Son, exists in the finite flesh of humanity, simultaneously other, and yet also the same. It is the very essence of divine nature as Catholic to pour itself into the other, carried outside of God's self in the loving care God has for everything. Pseudo-Dionysius' The Divine Names praises God's capacity precisely insofar as God is good and the good, to abide in the other by virtue of his supernatural and ecstatic capacity to remain nevertheless within himself. Of course, such faithful Catholic luminaries as de Lubac, Guardini, Balthasar, and Newman do not mean at all to suggest by these statements that this radically open disposition or posture toward everything, everywhere, all at once should ever degrade into what I have elsewhere called the de-evolution of all these yeses into counterfeit generosities of eclecticism, relativism, or shallow pluralism. It is rather a discerning yes, a yes that transfigures, a yes that elevates, a yes to grace which builds upon nature. Our university's own mission statement likewise proclaims that its Catholic identity, which is rooted in a commitment first to the incarnation of Jesus Christ as the Logos and source of all integrated wisdom, directly animates the affirmation that while not everything can be affirmed without critique or transfiguration, no genuine search for the truth in the human or cosmic order is alien to the life of faith. 10 years after Notre Dame was founded in 1842, John Henry Newman delivered the lectures which were eventually published as The Idea of a University. Perhaps much to the surprise of his non-Catholic audience, who would have been more than a little suspicious of his establishing a Catholic university in Ireland at the time, he argued that the institution was not obliged merely to be a mouthpiece for Catholic views and Catholic authority, but rather a place wherein teachers and students could exercise that same freedom or liberality in pursuit of truth. The push and pull negotiation between Christian and pagan culture is, of course, as old as Christianity itself. And interestingly, the organic metaphor to describe it is just as old, if not older. The 4th century Cappadocian, Basil of Caesarea, wrote an address to adolescents, probably 363 or 364, on the most discerning way for Christians to engage classical Greek literature. There he argues compellingly that Christians ought to be conversant with poets, with historians, with orators, indeed with all who may further our soul's salvation. While Christians must cultivate the ultimate desires for that which is beyond the immanent frame, things which are beyond, in preparation for the life eternal, not mistaking natural desires like pride of ancestry, nor bodily strength, nor beauty, nor greatness, nor the esteem of all men, nor kingly authority, nor indeed whatever of human affairs may be called great for their final end. The wisdom gained from reading the classics can most certainly develop penultimate goods. Basil appeals to a metaphor from botany or agriculture to illustrate this point, where engagement with pagan culture is like the formation of leaves on a tree or plant which grow to protect and shelter the real fruit of salvation. While these outgrowths are certainly not interchangeable in terms of their absolute value, one can be the condition of the possibility for the other. And yet, Basil cautions, young people must be cautious, not to take in the poison with the honey, but they must read judiciously, taking on board the benefits, but not, for instance, accepting any glorification of immorality, any of the deliberate deceptions of rhetoric, or the polytheism of the antique Greek epics. We have to read, Basil thinks, like bees sip their nectar. Quote, "For the bees do not visit all the flowers without discrimination, nor indeed do they seek to carry away entire those upon which they light, but rather having taken so much as is adapted to their needs, they let the rest go. So we, if wise, shall take from heathen books whatever befits us and is allied to the truth, and shall pass over the rest." So, if it is true that non-Catholics can indeed be counted, at least in a manner of speaking, among Catholic writers, and if it is true that it is in fact the particular dogmatic claims of Catholicism which oblige Catholics to engage generously with the whole of human culture, then we can see just what we are up against tonight, as we hapless Ahabs try to get a handle on the great white whale of Catholic culture. With all these possible iterations and complications of responses to our query, what is Catholic culture? Besides the obvious option of trapping you all here forever with me within the indefinite, inexhaustible universe of the Library of Babel until we're all grinning skeletons, we must consider what is of the core or objective essence. We must go to the root. I will thus proceed first by offering what at least I think are 4 of the most important general characteristics of Catholic culture, and then move toward a conclusion by identifying what I think is the fundamental principle that animates all sundry expressions of it. As an ardent, even evangelical backyard kitchen gardener, so fervent in my devotions that my husband has taken to calling these years, with apologies to Taylor Swift, my feral dirt witch era, I am inclined to return us to the deepest meaning the word culture had among the ancients. In the antique world, more than anything else, culture had to do with the tilling and the cultivation of the soil. The word's etymology bears this out, as we trace the English cult of culture back to the German kult, which is related to the Latin verb colere, which means to protect, to till, to farm, to cultivate, and something that will prove crucial to our argument this evening, also to worship. That the word culture is related to the Latin word for cultivation, for tending, like a gardener cultivates soil by supplying it with necessary nutrients, amending it with natural fertilizers, removing weeds, signifies that culture does not merely indicate high-level products or content which emerge from any given society, but is in fact the very living substratum from which these products emerge. I have learned over the years that with gardening, good soil is everything. To cultivate it, to culture it, is patient, careful work, literally work that is full of care. It requires sustained, supple, devoted attention. Virgil's Georgics, written in 29 BCE, has almost entirely to do with rural matters, with the natural culture of the earth. The genre of the Georgic is concerned both with agricultural activities, animal husbandry, farming, and so on, as well as the theater of all the material conditions in which these activities take place: the soil, the air, the water, the land. Virgil waxes lyrical, as I am also wont to do, over composting and crop rotation, over first spring harvests and the somber, holy putting to sleep of the garden beds in late fall when they are raked and covered with decaying leaves or straw. Let's listen to Virgil as he speaks to us across more than 2,000 years. Likewise, alternate years, let your cut fields lie fallow, and the idle ground harden with neglect. Or sow yellow corn under another star, where you first harvested beans rich in their quivering pods, or a crop of slender vetch and the fragile stalks and rattling stems of bitter lupin. For example, a harvest of flax exhausts the ground, oats exhaust it, and poppies exhaust it, filled with Lethean sleep. But by rotation, the labor prospers. Don't be ashamed to saturate the arid soil with rich dung and scatter charred ashes over the weary fields, so with changes of crop, the land can rest. And then the untilled earth is not ungrateful. There's much wisdom for us here, and not just of the agrarian variety. What fundamental principles or characteristics of Catholic culture might we begin to intuit, so to speak, from the ground up? The first principle, perhaps, is the sacramental valuation of embodiment and the material. To paraphrase what O'Connor wrote about the nature of fiction writing, Catholic culture is about everything human, and we are made of dust. It thus will not, or at least ought not, scorn the body. In keeping with the resolutely incarnational commitment at the very center of Christianity, that the Son, or Logos, as the second person of the Trinity, united divine nature with human nature and became genuinely enfleshed as the human being Jesus Christ, becoming like us in all things save sin. Catholic culture stipulates the intrinsic value of matter and materiality. Part and parcel with the affirmation of materiality is the assumption that nature is inherently good, or at least, when transfigured by grace, has an innate capacity to become so. According to a sacramental view, visible material reality expresses and can even bring to presence invisible and spiritual reality. This commitment can also translate into Catholic art and culture and literature, which affirms not only the physical or material as such, but also seems to celebrate sensuality and immanence. Some examples might include Michelangelo's depiction of beautifully chiseled, muscular human figures, as in his David, or the figures on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Bernini's erotic ecstasy of St. Teresa sculpture in Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome, Evelyn Waugh's decadent irony in Brideshead Revisited, Vivaldi's exuberantly Baroque music, even the glorious heterogeneity and ephemerality of devotional Catholic kitsch. Second principle that we can draw from the connection between culture and agricultural cultivation is that good soil is enormously hospitable. It has the capacity to take in and transform organic matter, even things which otherwise would have been discarded. Banana peels, wilted kale, the ends of green beans, coffee grounds and their filters, eggshells, apple cores, and by some miracle transfigures them entirely into a rich, nutrient-dense growing medium which is full of life and potency. Truthfully, the process of composting has never ceased to amaze me. How can it be that from the decay of all these heterogeneous bits and bobs proceeds a crumbly, fine, uniformly colored finished compost? Such a phenomenon may be somewhat analogous to the operation of Catholic culture, in which, at least in the best versions of itself, dialogues with and builds upon non-Catholic, non-Christian, and non-theological sources. As Remi Brague argued in a 2017 article from What Is Left Over, which reflects upon Pope Benedict XVI's address to European intelligentsia on the roots of Western culture, the phenomenon of Christian culture is particularly strange because paradoxically, it is, quote, not made up of Christian elements. Hailing from both Athens and Jerusalem, Brague wrote, a Christian culture would not seem to be Christian at all, but instead an amalgam, a byproduct of the meeting of Athens and Jerusalem, end quote. Christianity emerged within the philosophical and cultural foundations of Judaism and the Greco-Roman world, and simply adopted what was to hand in the surrounding cultures. The Logos from the Stoics, Ousia from the ancient Greeks, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread from Judaism, and so on and so forth. Although, of course, the situation of Christianity and Judaism is different, given the great debts, close kinship, and shared patrimony. While Christianity came to prominence within Greek and Roman cultures, the same Christian framework, Brague argues, could very well be filled with other content. Later on in Christian history, Germanic and Slavic mores, Celtic legends, and other materials were included. The paradoxical power of Christian or Catholic culture is that it can transfigure so much of what it contacts, and this by virtue of its living members who were continually converted, given over to a life of faith and love. Somewhat differently, Vatican II documents like Gaudium et Spes and Nostra Aetate indicate the intrinsic value of programs of dialogue and enculturation, which must carefully negotiate the knife's edge between uncritical capitulation and doing injustice to the host culture. In a meeting with the Doctrinal Commission in Asia, in Hong Kong in 1993, Joseph Ratzinger delivered an address called Christ, Faith, and the Challenge of Cultures, in which he argued that the sign of a high culture is its openness, its capacity to give and to receive, its power to develop, to allow itself to be purified and become more conformed to truth and to the human being. The church, again, does not have a perfect track record here, but these are the ideals to which we must continue to aspire. Closely connected is the third principle, that good soil is enormously diverse. A single teaspoon of it can have up to 10,000 different species. That's real. A single teaspoon of soil can have up to 10,000 different species invisibly dwelling within it. Microbes, spiders, earthworms, bacteria, nematodes, centipedes, fungi, all the rest. As many farmers and prominent figures in agrarian movements, like Catholic poet and essayist Wendell Berry, for one, already know well, it's precisely agricultural monoculture that depletes the necessary balance of these microorganisms and nutrients, stripping the soil of its capacity to nourish. In our extrapolations from agriculture to Catholic culture, the intrinsic value of diversity can be seen not only in the goodness of the global church on its global stage, but also a bit more narrowly within the context of Catholic educational institutions like our own. Institutions which historically have upheld a commitment to the principles of Catholic culture should be more rather than less likely to be rigorous and excellent according to the terms and standards of each discipline. More rather than less likely to respect proper methodological borders and boundaries within the disciplines, and more rather than less likely to affirm the intrinsic goodness of these disciplines for their own sake without instrumentalizing them. Engineers, mathematicians, historians, artists, scientists, sociologists, and poets retain the integrity of their respective disciplines, even as the truths in each field mutually condition one another as part of an integrated whole. Finally, fourth, because, and not in spite of, this radical diversity, good soil is utterly teeming with life. It is literally a culture of life. And it's not simply that when a sterile patch of backyard grass gets cultivated into a vegetable or flower garden, that it invites bees and hummingbirds and goldfinches and butterflies into our mini ecosystems, though it certainly does that. But as we have already seen, the soil itself is not inert or dead matter, but rather, as Sir Albert Howard's classic, The Soil and Health, reminds us, it is populated by millions and millions of minute existences, quite invisible to our eyes, who pursue their own lives. They come into being, grow, work, and die. It is this life which is continually being passed into the plant. Healthy soil ecosystems, which are able to sustain life, to grow food or flower, are built upon complex matrices of balanced relation and constantly adapting relations of mutual dependence. So too it is with Catholic culture more broadly, rooted as it is in a profound commitment to the intrinsic human dignity of all persons, born and unborn, who were always already embedded within relations of dependence and care, up to and including the dependence of the dead upon the prayers of the living. Catholic culture privileges community, social justice, the common good, subsidiarity, the preferential option for the poor, and the protection of life from conception to natural death. To pose the question of Catholic culture is nothing less than to pose the question, which is coincidentally President Bob Dowd's Notre Dame Forum theme this year, of what it is we owe to each other. While these four principles may express or embody features of Catholic culture to varying degrees, we must still discuss the one needful thing, the fundamental and objective force that comprises the soul of Catholic culture, that which, so to speak, provides the form for the body, that which provides integrity and intelligibility to the diversity and multiplicity of its many manifestations. What I have in mind here is a decisively Catholic vision of the final end or goods of human nature. All cultures, of course, presuppose an anthropology, even if only implicitly. Whether or not these fundamental questions get articulated privately or voiced out loud, they are still implicated in the development of any culture. What is the nature of the human being? What are the proximate goods toward which the human being is oriented? What is the human being's true end, purpose, or perfection, that is her ultimate good? What in her most intimate heart of hearts does she want or desire? Vatican II's Gaudium et Spes defines culture precisely in terms of these perfections. That is, as everything whereby the human being develops and perfects his or her many bodily and spiritual qualities. The notion of perfection, of course, provokes an ultimate answer to the question of what's good. A question which herewith invites our long-promised reflection upon the intimate relationship between ethics and culture. Here we can take some guidance from Thomas Aquinas. Commentators have noted that for Thomas, the cause of culture is human nature, tending toward goods that perfect it. Thus, the very anima or soul of culture is none other than human perfection, that is, our God-given grace and capacity to be perfected in our desire for the good. A Catholic theological anthropology, especially as articulated by the angelic doctor, assumes both the natural end of human happiness and the supernatural end of her beatitude, while union with God, who is, metaphysically speaking, goodness itself, and thus the ultimate object of all desire, is her highest good. Thus, the question of ethics. If it is to be as abundant and fertile and complex as it must be, cannot be reductively or narrowly contracted into philosophical puzzles or do's and don'ts or rules to be followed, but must rather be closely intertwined with those humane questions at the root and fundament of culture itself. In Veritatis Splendor, John Paul II offers an interpretive gloss on the question that the rich young ruler poses to Jesus in the gospel. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Suggesting that what animates the question is not a mere legalism, but is in fact a question about the full meaning of life. He goes on to say, quote, that this is in fact the aspiration at the heart of every human decision and action, the quiet searching and interior prompting which sets freedom in motion. This question is ultimately an appeal to the absolute good, which attracts us and beckons us. It is the echo of a call from God, who is the origin and goal of human life. Only God can answer the question about what is good, because he is the good itself. To ask about the good, in fact, ultimately means to turn towards God, the fullness of goodness. When Gaudium et Spes takes up the question of the proper development of culture in chapter 2, the Council Fathers assert that human beings can come to a true and full humanity only through culture, that is, through the cultivation of the goods and values of nature. These cultural goods, however, are, quote, to be subordinated to the integral perfection of the human person, to the good of the community and of the whole society. Therefore, it is necessary to develop the human faculties in such a way that there results a growth of the faculty of admiration, of intuition, of contemplation, of making personal judgment, of developing a religious, moral, and social sense. These insights, especially those of cultivating contemplative, receptive postures of being in the world, could not be more crucial to developing our understanding of the ultimate foundation of Catholic culture. If it is, in fact, human perfection which animates Catholic culture, and if the culmination of human perfection is union with the God who is goodness itself, it should come as no surprise to us that the etymology of the Latin root colere, which develops alongside the more explicitly agricultural valences we've already discussed, is in fact to worship. Readers of Joseph Pieper's 1948 essay, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, will easily recognize this argument. Pieper's essay draws out compellingly the resonances between the word culture and the word cultus, or cult, which originally signified a sacred space and time carved out from the ordinary saculorum. Human beings, before we are anything else, are the ones who worship, or at least those who are structurally and existentially oriented to worship. It is this constitutive orientation of human beings toward worship, which takes place in festivity, feast, leisure, celebration, which is the very condition of the possibility for culture to exist. Now, the modern world has adopted a culture of what Pieper damningly calls total work, where everything, even our breaks and vacations, are commodified and oriented to doing more work. A recovery of genuine leisure, however, invites conscious withdrawal from such a deadening way of being and the cultivation of an interior disposition, a condition of the soul, characterized by a stillness that is the necessary preparation for accepting reality, the disposition of receptive understanding, of contemplative beholding, and immersion in the real. While the ancient affinity between culture and cultivation, that is, specifically with tilling and farming and dirt and composting, might have suggested that the phenomenon of culture is primarily an active enterprise produced solely from the work of human hands, Pieper's articulation of culture as worship requires that human beings adopt a posture of receptivity rather than activity, something akin, perhaps, to the open, attentive, restful disposition of parishioners at Eucharistic adoration. The leisure, which is the basis of culture, is not exemplified, Pieper suggests, by the one who intervenes, but of the one who opens himself, not of someone who seizes, but of one who lets go. The surge of new life that flows out to us when we give ourselves to the contemplation of a blossoming rose, a sleeping child, or of a divine mystery. Is this not like the surge of life that comes from a deep, dreamless sleep? And as it is written in the book of Job, God gives us songs in the middle of the night. It is a gift. It is letting oneself receive a gift. This foundational realm of leisure, which is especially important for those of us invested in the project of Catholic liberal education, implies the realm of everything that, without being useful, nevertheless belongs to a complete human existence. Let's return to Pope Benedict XVI's presentation to the European elites on the roots of Western culture, which made such an impression on Remi Brague, in which the Pope utterly mystified his audience by talking mostly about monks. But it was, in fact, these quiet monks, just going about their ordinary daily business in the graceful fecundity of voluntary obedience, who ended up preserving the whole of Western culture. As they copied, they preserved classical Latin and its related texts, most of which, of course, were non-Christian figures like Virgil, Ovid, Lucretius, not because they were intending to build a culture or preserve monuments to their own creativity and ingenuity, or build creativity and ingenuity of their pagan predecessors. Nevertheless, as Brague argues, by their simple acceptance and cultivation of fundamentally Christian principles, like the value and intrinsic goodness of labor and a vision of the world as created by a good God, they splendidly achieved what they didn't intend. If we still think that the fundaments of Catholic culture have to do primarily with doing or knowing or making, the Pope sets us straight as he recalls the day-to-day activities of most of Western monasticism: prayer, singing, work, obedience. Christian culture is thus not marked with the pace of frenetic making or content creation, but rather is a culture of being, in which we first receive the good gifts of our Creator and respond to them and to the good itself in the mode of joyful praise. As Ratzinger wrote, quote, "The monks have to pray and sing in a manner commensurate with the grandeur of the world handed down to them, with its claim on true beauty. This intrinsic requirement of speaking with God and singing of Him with words He Himself has given is what gave rise to the great tradition of Western music. It was not a form of private creativity in which the individual leaves a memorial to himself and makes self-representation his essential criterion. Rather, it is about vigilantly recognizing with the ears of the heart the inner laws of the music of creation, the archetypes of music that the Creator built into His world and into men, and thus discovering music that is worthy of God, and at the same time, truly worthy of man. What gave Europe's culture its foundation, the search for God and the readiness to listen to Him, remains today the basis of any genuine culture," end quote. Catholic culture, then, is ultimately a marvelous, capacious way of being, a limitless capacity to engage everything that comes our way in all its giftedness and gratuity, and return it to the Creator in the mode of worship and of praise. This receptivity to God as the good at the heart of Catholic culture, or in another idiom, the fundamental leisure which is the basis of culture, is therefore not in the first instance active but receptive, not primary but secondary. It is an iterative, recursive, answering disposition of reception, response, return, echo. I'm reminded of the leaden echo of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, The Leaden Echo and the Golden Echo. The leaden echo despairs over how human beings could possibly render the fragility and ephemerality of beautiful things stable. Despairs over how to keep beauty from vanishing away. But the golden echo says, there is one way. Give beauty back, beauty, 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 back to God. Beauty's self and beauty's giver. See? Not a hair is, not an eyelash, not the least lash lost. Every hair is hair of the head numbered. To give beauty back, to find something we see good, glorious, wonderful, to love something lovable, draws human beings into the originary giftedness of all that exists in the created order, and joins human creativity and affirmation with the divine creativity and affirmation of God, whose sustaining care elevates even the smallest and most ordinary thing. Moreover, Leisure lives, Pieper writes, on affirmation. That is, quote, the cheerful affirmation by the human being of his or her own existence, of the world as a whole, and of God, of love, that is. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. As Pieper is often wont to say, the fundamental affirmation of real love is to say to the other, it's good that you are here. It's wonderful that you exist. Our giving beauty back in the form of desire mirrors and participates in God's prior gift of beauty, God's very gift of God's self to human beings. When we respond to beauty with love, we are participating in the infinite generosity of a God who calls me into existence to say, lovingly to me and to every seed and to every petal, it is good that you exist. Is this fundamental affirmation not at the very root of Catholic culture? To praise the praiseworthy things, to love the lovable things, to elevate the good things of nature, art, literature, education, and ordinary life for the intrinsic goodness they have merely in virtue of their existence. To say with joyful sincerity to the aged, the sick, the fragile, the unborn, the disenfranchised, the very poor, and the very weak, it's good that you are here. It's wonderful that you exist. And would not such a vision of Catholic culture, one animated fundamentally by the return of goods to the divine good, and thus always already reciprocal, enmeshed in relations of profound and profoundly loving dependence, likewise altogether reconfigure ethics, with which culture is so very deeply intertwined? Pieper is fond of quoting Thomas Aquinas' dictum that the essence of virtue consists more in the good than in the difficult. That is to say, the highest expression of an ethical act is not simply a matter of willpower, doing the hard thing, but rather a joyful fulfillment of positive desire for the good. It is not the joylessness of mere duty, but something closer to the mode of desire, happiness, pleasure, and liberality, which is what we actually mean by Christian obedience. Thus, an ethics of culture is at the same time an ethics of good desiring. Though our final end is both a given and a gift, to receive that gift, or any good gift, with gratitude is nothing other than to habituate our desires to the generous, self-diffusive good in whom we live and move and have our being. Thank you.
We have some time for questions, so if you have questions for Professor Martin, please raise your hand, speak clearly into microphone.
Thank you so much for your talk. So it seems to me that in America, we are kind of over the hump of building modernist churches, and the new churches that are being built seem to be very beautiful and kind of well received. But there's a question, which is, when we build these new churches, what kind of art will we fill them with? And how will the priests and communities that decide these things, how will they know the art to choose and the artist to patronize? So I guess the general question, as it relates to Catholic culture, is what is the role of the visual arts in the building up of Catholic culture? And what role should Catholic institutions like Notre Dame play in this building up?
Thank you for that lovely question. Well, as you probably already know from there's some of the Vatican documents about the liturgy. I'm thinking, is it Sacramentum? Which one is it? Yeah, thank you. The one about the liturgy, it does say there that the Catholic Church is not committed to any particular form of art, right? So it says, certainly you don't want something distracting or something scandalous or something that would be insufficient to, or insufficiently worthy for the celebration of the Eucharist. But there's no sense in which art or architecture has to follow a certain style, like Gothic or Baroque or Classic or whatever. So, I mean, I think according to the logic that I've kind of laid out, at least in this talk, there's space in Catholic culture for, you know, our friends at University of Mary who have their brutalist architecture. I see some University of Mary friends in the audience. So very sort of brutalist architecture, which is kind of, it's not for everyone, but it is for some. I mean, it is for some, right? And so, so I don't feel like I can offer a referendum on art or architecture at the level of the particulars in a kind of, you know, normative way. But I do think, as a theologian who works on aesthetics, that beauty, if it is to attract and compel, it has to direct the human soul towards that which is beyond. It has to lift the heart. I mean, some people may love a kind of minimalist, the silence, the simplicity of a minimalist aesthetic, and others are not so compelled by it. But I think I'm not nervous about modern art. I guess I should just put my cards on the table. I think there's something that can be very interesting about modern art. I do think for something like Stations of the Cross, it ought to be figural, and it ought to indicate something that's connected to the theological claims and the claims of the gospel. But I guess as a matter of a rule, I find certain modern art to be very interesting in terms of its focus on texture, the texture of paint. To me, that feels very incarnational, very material. I'm sort of drawn to attend to it in a way that chastens my own sense that I have understood a piece of art in the way that I might in more representative art. But it's a complicated question, and I mean, I'm not a church architect, thank goodness, but I do think, at least according to the logic that I have laid out here, let 1,000 flowers bloom in a certain sense.
All right, well, thank you for your talk. I noticed you kind of had two modes in which you discussed that Catholic culture can be generated. The first being a kind of assimilationist view, how the church took on the heritage of antiquity. The second being a view more so that it develops incongruence with the faith, right? That you spoke of this in music in reference to medieval monasticism, how the Western musical tradition develops really out of the practice and is integrally mixed with the faith. As a kind of counterpoint or complication of this, I'd raise that Oswald Spengler, he talks about how you could say the soul of the Western musical tradition is in fact an outgrowth, not necessarily of the faith itself, but of a deeper worldview, the Weltanschauung. And in this, he says, the fugue as a kind of archetypal Western musical form, and unique to the West as well, is not really the outgrowth of, you could say, a certain theological view, but rather of this deeper sense within the culture, within the people. So the question I would ask then is, do you think that this second mode that you discussed of the faith integrally generating culture is something that's really possible, or is everything a kind of assimilation, more as happened in the times of antiquity?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think at least what Remi Brague argues in the article that I referenced, he basically says Christianity doesn't come up with a set of kind of practices. Like, there's not a Christian way of cooking, like there might be a Jewish way of cooking. There's not a. So it's not. That's kind of really what he meant. I mean, I think my language isn't really music as much as it is poetry, but when you were talking about the fugue, I was thinking about there's something about the nature of the fugue, which I find very helpful for thinking about Catholic culture and Catholic tradition as such. So of course I'm thinking of Charles Péguy, who I really like. He's a French Catholic poet, if you don't know him, but he speaks very recursive, like he gives an image and then he comes back to it. He's very fugal, but nothing's lost. So things are assimilated from around, right? The past is always brought with us, but because it is spoken in a new context, there's something new. So I think that maybe that's kind of more of the second thing that you said, that it's all assimilation, but it's not mere assimilation, I guess. When Catholics or Christians kind of take in this and say, this matter, this is presencing something, this is a sacramental or something like this. We're reevaluating, we're looking at sort of the ordinary things of the world with eyes that refigure and reconfigure and transfigure everything. So I think it's an assimilation, but sometimes that word assimilation or appropriation has a negative context, and that's not really what I mean to indicate, that we're just kind of appropriating other cultures or other things. It's that life or the sort of generosity which is at the heart of divine plenitude allows us to take in everything and make it our own, which does sound like we just colonize everything, but that's not what I mean. There's a couple hands, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. You're super cool, and we're so lucky to have you here at the Nicola Center. My question relates to what you were speaking about with Catholic social teaching and how we engage with the poor and vulnerable and weak in society, while also appreciating this beauty at the heart of everything and this leisure. How do we kind of, as Catholics, go out into the world and engage with this really hard and heavy stuff while also maintaining this kind of joy and celebration in our faith?
Thank you. That's a lovely question. I mean, I think the way that I want to use leisure is very much the way that Pieper is using it, right? That it's not like sitting by the pool with a Mai Tai kind of idea, but it's this interior, this cultivation of an interior disposition that can look at everything, even suffering, with this contemplative, attentive awareness to the real, and so that and to receive things as gift. And so I think maybe there's two parts to your question. One is, I think sometimes the way that certain charitable acts get rendered to communities of the poor and disenfranchised actually truncates this notion of leisure, which is at the heart. So what I mean is, we go somewhere, we hand somebody some money, we give them job training, we basically like turn them into workers, we make them productive members of society, we like just provide material, sustenance, which I think is good. But I also think what's really motivating the answer to this question is my experience teaching the great books at the Center for the Homeless, which PLS used to do before COVID. And I just remember sitting there, first of all, like thinking about the fact that these clients at the Center for the Homeless are carrying the Norton anthology around with them on the street, which is like too much to bear for me to think about. But also that we're sitting around the table and you ask them, do you think Antigone made the right choice to bury her brother? And you see them, as Simone Weil says, not as a mass of the disenfranchised, but as a person who has an opinion about what Antigone should have done. And to me, that's at the heart of leisure, right? To see the other like that. But I think what your real question was is how you keep joy in the face of persistent evidence to the contrary that there's anything to be joyful about, right? I mean, I think that's the issue. I mean, I think that's the Christian miracle, isn't it? What does it mean to be able to know that you are beholding I'm thinking of adoration here. You are beholding the real, and that kind of gives you ground to be as open and as porous and as good to people as God is to you, to the best of your ability, right? I mean, to me, that's what it feels like, even when the felt experience is, how are we ever going to make anything better? But I don't know, that's the sort of long-winded answer to your question.
You have time for maybe one more question.
Thank you so much for your talk, Professor. To put it in the words of your kind of farming analogy, what is our role as academics and educators and Christian professionals in what we might call the problem of pests and weeds and disease, in our roles in recognizing and addressing outside contaminants to Catholic culture that seek to appropriate or destroy the fruits of that culture as we engage with the broader culture of the modern world? And also, how do we prevent our focus on that from dominating our lives as Christians?
Mm-hmm. On sort of weed expunging, you mean? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. No, I think that's right. I mean, I'm speaking in a very aspirational voice, right? I mean, I think if you just look around your diocese or get on Twitter, God forbid, or whatever it's called now, then you realize that there's a lot more weeds than there is fruit in certain ways, right? I mean, Catholic culture, so to speak, has really, I hate to sound like the sort of curmudgeon, like get off my lawn, but it's like, it has really devolved insofar as, you know, there's certain groups that are right and dogmatic, and you're not being a Catholic, right? And we're not going to talk to each other, and it's like, it misses the whole point of the joy of the gospel, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what you're saying. So I mean, I can't speak for everybody and everybody's disposition, but I can speak for myself as a theology professor and as a seminar leader in our PLS Great Books classes, right? I mean, I think part of that is modeling and teaching students to see the other with a hermeneutic of charity and with love, to really understand the love that it's at the heart of every question or critique, right? There's often pain behind questions or critique, and if you're able to see that and respond to it without saying, you're wrong and here's why, I mean, that to me feels like the way that you can make interventions in your own small garden, so to speak. You can't be responsible for everybody's garden, but you can work in your own classrooms. One very practical thing is a colleague of mine and I are teaching a new class this time called Catholicism and Tradition, where we're trying to model responsible civil discourse on questions that sort of vex Catholics in the modern world, and sort of produce students who are able to ask hard questions with love, to be self-critical before they're critical of the other. So I mean, I think there's ways of doing it, but to me, if we miss the joy, then it just doesn't seem like it's worth doing to me, right? I mean, the gospel, it was for freedom that Christ set us free, right? That's kind of my mantra here. So I've been going on and on, but are we done? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all.
All right,
If you
thank
please
you.
join me in thanking Professor Martin.